Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all very much for joining this case. Obviously, hugely significant event that's taken place as of Friday last week, quite unprecedented in terms of its size. Um, I'm joined with me today by my colleagues and friends, Andrii Sovershennyi, Federico Paesano, and Nick Steegmans, our all-star cast of investigators from all over the place. As you can imagine, Crystal's investigations and intelligence team are currently powered by copious amounts of energy drinks and a relentless desire to make good on the people who've been victims of the hack. And what we'd like to go through you today is discussing some of the nuances about this case, obviously unprecedented in terms of its size. I think it's quite interesting how, everything had kind of gone a bit quiet and everyone was talking about the last big hack being WazirX. And now we have hit ByBit and we've completely eclipsed anything before. And I think, given the size of the hack, we have some really unique problems that we have to address as a company. And similarly, the attackers themselves have some pretty unique problems that they need to address as criminals too. Like when you steal 1.4 billion dollars, you can't just take that anywhere. You need to find someone who's prepared to trade it for you. So without further ado, then let's just do a bit of a background to the case, then, and then obviously I'll pass on to the team for comments. Just regarding questions, if you do have any, please just leave them in the chat. If they're a quick question, as a team, we'll try and answer them as we go along, just to try and help everybody out. If it's a bit more of an open question, we'll try and save it to the end. The goal of today's session isn't just to sort of lecture you and say, like, this is awful, this is happening. It's actually to give you some practical advice on, if you were a business in their position, like what you could have done in advance or what preparation you can do to protect yourself. And I think in many cases here, it's not necessarily about just protecting yourself from the attack. It's more about knowing how to respond to it. And I think we've got a good discussion to have about ByBit's response to this incident, which I would say frankly, has been very, very good. So let's just frame the incident then. On the 21st of February, at around 14:20 GMT, so in the early afternoon, ByBit, a large international cryptocurrency exchange, had a security incident that resulted in the loss of $1.4 billion, which was a staggering amount of money, eclipsing almost every other attack we've ever seen. Not only was it a large attack, it was very sophisticated. Thieves were able to convince ByBit's staff to approve transactions that gave them control over their assets. And we'll talk about that with Fede in a minute. And we've seen this similar attack vector from other attacks that were taking place not so recently. WazirX as being one example, and Femex. I think the other thing too to talk about the attack is 14:20 on a Friday afternoon. Lots of people maybe winding down for the day. Early afternoons on a Friday, perhaps. Certainly for headquarters of ByBit, which has offices in Dubai, people are probably on their way home or working from home, like winding down for the day. 14:20 is about 6:20 p.m. So the attackers really struck at a good time where there was, when there's a time to sort of get ahead and to go when things are quiet. But let's just turn now to like the actual attack itself and like how it was done technically. So Fede, I know you've prepared something for this. Like we talk about they've managed to convince the staff to approve a transaction, but can you just walk us through what that actually looks like from a technical perspective, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Nick. And yes, the attack struck us exactly when we were, at least in Europe, all ready to go home, or somebody was already on the move. Of course, it was not chosen by chance. So let me go through. Oh, this is the news. So you're already all familiar with it. There's a staggering amount, which caught everybody by surprise. But let's have a look at the transaction that everybody focused on, at least initially. So this is the transaction that everybody knows about. It's not the full amount, of course. I'm concentrating on the one that really got in the news immediately, which is 400,000 ETH moving out of ByBit, which of course raises many alerts and many questions all around the world. Like, what is happening? Is it a normal transaction? Is it a simple transfer? done by ByBit. As we will see, if you read the code, it's not a normal transaction. And there are many reasons for this. We will talk about it later. But maybe I have to tell you slightly in advance, something about the kind of preparation that was done. And we will find these clues in the contract itself on the blockchain. But basically, the attacker prepared this attack a few days in advance. We will see exactly the moment they did it, but they prepared two contracts in advance. One is called an exploiter contract and a phishing contract. I know I will ask you many times to keep numbers and letters in mind. I know it's difficult, but I will try and repeat it. So the exploiter contract starts with BDD 077 and the phishing contract 9622. Okay, just try and keep this in mind for later. Also, the way that the ByBit cold wallet works. This is 1DB92. We may wonder, and we may think that every sort of huge transaction like this is done with the help of an hardware wallet for the security and for all the security that it gives, right? Actually, this is much more difficult on EVM chains to confirm a transaction through that kind of wallet. And in particular, we heard it from ByBit themselves. I mean, they explained it. They use a safe wallet. So it's an interface where you sign transactions online. In fact, the CEO was asked, was it a cold wallet? And he said, partially. So is it some sort of cold wallet, but you have to connect online to send transactions on an interface. And we will discuss, probably this was one of the attack vectors, right? And also something else I need to tell you about the cold wallet. It's not like a normal wallet or a normal ETH address where you make transaction directly out of it. It works with delegation. So the main cold wallet has an implementation contract. You see below the correct one, 34CFAC. Okay, they work together to make transactions. So there is the delegation. The main contract, the cold wallet, tells the other contract what to do, right? Also, this is a proxy contract. So what does it mean? That for convenience, in order to change the instructions of transaction and the way it's going to operate, you can change the implementation contract, so the one that you delegate to do the actions. You just need the proper number of signatures, which is in the contract itself. We know already that in the case of this wallet was 3 out of 6. So there are 6 signatures, and 3 are needed to make any transaction. Right, so remember this, it can be changed, which is in fact what the attackers did. But let's now concentrate again to the transaction that sent the 400,000 ETH away. And to do that, we are going to have a look on chain. So this is the transaction. So the first thing that we see, let me share again this part of the screen with you. So this is the actual transaction. What do we see? It happened on the 21st of February. We know the time when it happened. We already mentioned that. First thing that struck my attention is a sweep ETH function, right? So it's not simply a transfer. Sweep means it empties completely the wallet where the funds are, so where the instruction is sent. So completely sweeping the cold wallet. We know it's 400,000 ETH that were sent. And something that is interesting, also when we see down here in the input data, if we decode this, we see the address where the funds were sent, which is 4766. Now, how is it possible that this transaction went through? Let's analyze it by having a look at the cold wallet itself. Okay, so let's analyze the cold wallet. And first of all, we see here already the transaction done by the attackers. It all started, as you see, a few minutes before the wallets were emptied by this transaction. As you can see, is an exit transaction. Now, I know we are not all so expert, maybe to follow certain details. And also, I have to mention in advance, I am by no means a coder, so I don't write contracts in Solidity. I know well enough to investigate those cases. And what I can find here, this is quite a normal transaction, right? So if we go before, a few days before or a few hours before, we see this transaction happens all the time. Exit transaction is the one that starts any multi-sig transaction, right? This is a very legitimate and normal transaction. And we can see in the input data a few information. One thing that I want to keep in mind is this field number 3. It says 0, right? I will explain later, but this is a normal call for a transaction by a cold wallet or by a multisig wallet. This field should always be 0. It's a normal call. We see the difference with the attacker's transaction. So let me go back. Okay, this is how everything initiated with this transaction. And what happened immediately after, and as we see just 2 minutes after, the attacker started moving the funds away. First with a test transaction, probably, because we see it's only $90. Okay, that was probably just a test. Immediately followed by all the other transactions. Now, I don't want to open them all, but we have seen this is probably not the one we started from, which is the one sweeping all the ETH, 400,000 ETH. But how was it possible to initiate those transactions? And to have a look at that, we have to start again having a look at the exact transaction that happened. It was really the starting point of everything. So this transaction started with 46 DEE. Okay, what do we see here? If we scroll down again, we see the 2. So this transaction seems to go to the ByBit cold wallet. So at first glance, you may say, okay, this is a normal transaction, nothing fishy here. But let's have a look at the input data, because this is where the tricky part is. Let's decode this so we can read it. So first thing that strikes to my mind, this is not an address that was normally used. In fact, it was never used by ByBit themselves. Let's open this and see what it says. This is a contract, of course. It was created by ByBit exploiter. When? Let's see the transaction when this contract was initiated, 18th of February. So this was planned at least 3 days in advance. Right, so first thing. The second thing is, you remember the field I showed to you before? Field number 3, it says now 1. So this is a delegate call. This is something that usually, as far as I've seen also from the other transactions done by ByBit, usually doesn't happen. Why? Because it's a delegate call that delegates a lot of power to other functions, in this case, to this address, to everything that is now in the contract that is now delegating to, right? So what else do we see here? Signatures. Okay, that's proper signatures. We will maybe talk about it later. Maybe we will go in the realm of speculations, of course, but we will talk about it. What is really important, you remember the delegation. So a cold wallet delegates certain functions to an implementation contract, which can be substituted by certain transactions. This is exactly what happened. And where do we see this? If we go again, having a look at this transaction, and we go into the state. State means what this transaction changed. And it changed 2 things in these 2 fields, 0 and 5. And 0 is the one that is interesting for us. You remember the delegation contracts? The one before, so before the change by the attackers, was this one. And we can simply have a look at this one. And this was the delegation contract, the legitimate one. In fact, if we go and look at the contract itself, it's like a normal contract, like many others. It's a perfectly legitimate one. Let's have a look at how it changed. We go back here to the state, and let's have a look at the new implementation contract that was substituted. And here we'll find something really interesting. If you look at the contract itself, now we see it's completely different from before, from a legitimate contract. Of course, we cannot read this, but if we switch to opcode view, what do we see? Again, I tell you, I'm not an expert. I cannot read it all, but something really struck my mind, which is this. And this address is the one that we saw initially making the call, the exec transaction that allowed everything to happen afterwards. Okay, Nick, then I would pass back to you. This is, how from the blockchain, what we can see the way it happens. So what allowed the attackers to initiate those transactions and sweep all the cold wallet.
Yeah, thanks, Fede. And I think like the thing to step forward from that is the attackers were able to convince through deception the users of ByBit to approve that contract and allow it to take over. And now what you've seen is like the nuts and bolts of how that attack actually took place, like what it looks like on chain. I think, Nick and Andrea, I don't know if you want to chime in here. Like, what do you think about this particular method of attack? Like, I would say that whenever I've given advice in the past, and maybe even recently, I've said is like multi-signature wallets are always what we see as like the gold standard and the most secure way of working. What do you think the impact of these attackers being able to convince a multi-sig user or multi-sig wallet to sign something? What's that mean for services?
I believe that this particular case is like a game changer right now, just because it's pretty nicely shown that cold wallets are not safe anymore. Multi-signature wallets are not safe. Even your own interface is not safe right now. And based on that, there is like an open and a huge question: what you should believe in? Like, do you have to check every transaction from every particular tool, or do you have to ask the security team to check your computer before every transaction? Like, it's not really possible to answer like immediately on that. In this particular case, as far as I am aware from the band stream and from what I've read in different posts and articles, the signatures, people who were responsible for signing this transaction, they were located in different parts of the world. So in order to identify them and to leak their signatures, it required a lot of time for preparation, for phishing, for social engineering them. And somehow they actually managed to do that. And if they're capable to identify people with signatures, like the signers, who are in safe. I don't know. Nick, maybe you have some comments?
Yeah, I mean, I don't I don't think there's too much to add. In the past we've heard some people say that part of the problem is the fact that multi-sig is too complex when it comes to Ethereum. Right, with other chains, multi-sigs integrate natively. With Ethereum, it's always a smart contract. Then again, like there's certain wallet providers like Safe that have made a UI to make it as streamlined and as efficient as possible, but it'll sort of be up in the air to see how is this just like a risk that exchanges say, we have to use multi-sig, and the fact that some multi-sig wallets, I'm not saying that Safe did, but some multi-sig wallets might have, bugs in their UI, the fact that, we need to strengthen our security protocols amongst all of our key holders and so on. Like, I think there's a lot of smaller changes, like tighter changes that could be made when it comes to like internal security, as well as the vetting of suppliers, especially when it comes to things like wallet software and getting audited regularly. There's so many like Web3 auditing companies. People sloot through crypto exchanges seemingly for fun on Twitter to see if they can find something that, they can cash in for a bug bounty or something like that. And so the fact something like this still manages to slip through the cracks just tells us that we have quite a ways left to go.
I tend to agree. And I think another thing to say here as well is that multi-signature is like, I think as Andrii's put it, and I think you say too, is like, it's a game changer. This has happened, and not being able to trust your interface is a very, very frightening prospect. But I think, like, again, we also need to understand like the capability of this attacker. Like, when people talk about cyber threat intelligence, they talk about APT, advanced persistent threats, which means that they have time, they invest resources, they will spend a long amount of effort to try and collect the information. And I think what I find most fascinating about this case was not only were they able to identify, the signatories like in the different jurisdictions, they were able to convince all of them in different places at the same time into doing something, which then ultimately gave them access, which is, the level of information you need to collect to do that is really high. And, I think even Fede, when you showed us the contract a minute ago, we were looking at like the attack didn't just happen overnight. They didn't just like walk in and saw a front door open and ran in. They started making preparation days in advance. Like on the smart contract side, getting things ready. They'd done all their research and they were ready to execute. And then timing on the Friday in an afternoon for many of the critical staff, absolutely, nailed it, like in terms of like when to do this. And I'd say, when you're doing a heist like this, like you really have to be at the top of your game, and it's genuinely incredibly sophisticated. A general question then, Andrew, I think maybe I asked you is like, we saw some preparations for the attack, and hindsight's always 2020. Confirmation of the attack came out about an hour and a half later after the money had actually been transferred. My question is to you, is like, were there any other indications that we could have picked up on? Could we have reacted faster to this? And what would you suggest to as sort of solutions for that?
From our side, from blockchain analysis side, it was not possible to identify for sure from the first glance that this particular wallet was responsible for the hack. That even the delegation change status doesn't represent that this particular wallet is responsible for the hack. You should dive deeper. You should check for the source of the funds. You should check what exactly happened. Because, for example, another pretty similar case that happened also potentially with the Lazarus group from DPRK, Wazirex case. Pretty similar story that signature were leaked and the funds were stolen. 230 millions were sweep like in a minute. It was easier to detect just because the particular contract that was responsible for changing the delegation, he received the funds to initiate all these token swaps from the Tornado Cash. When you see that there is such a wallet that has such a flow of the funds 1 week before the initial attack, it's already like a huge red flag, at least for the analysis.
Yeah, I think though that seeing $1.4 billion moving, like maybe could have been an indication that something was wrong. But again, we don't know what's routine and what's not routine, right? And I think that's one of the interesting things here is like as a team and everyone else, you kind of don't believe it when you see it, right? When someone says that 1.4 billion is moving, like you suddenly have. Like really, that kind of needs to suddenly start shifting. Like we all kind of have a wake up there, and I think that ties us into like the next sort of segment I want to talk about is I've now stolen $1.4. How the hell do you launder that? And we've had like some really good conversations as a group over the past few days, with our sleepless nights and copious amounts of energy drinks. We've decided like, well, what are their options? Like, how are they going to go ahead with this? Whenever I talk about, money laundering in crypto generally is I call this thing the laundering plan. And when you steal something, you need to think about how you're going to swap it for something else, like when you're going to use it. So for example, one of the things that people often say to me is, well, we're just going to throw it all into Monero. Well, the total supply of Monero is about $4 billion. So you would be eating, over a quarter of the total supply of Monero if you were to swap it straight away. And you still need to find a counterparty who holds that amount of money for you. So, running that way is difficult. Second one is, okay, when we usually see these attacks and whenever we see this particular actor involved, the general area where they run to is Tornado Cash. The Tornado Cash liquidity pool is 150,000 Ethereum. You still haven't got enough space to go to, which creates like all sorts of problems. Similarly, you've got to find somewhere to swap the money that's got enough liquidity, even to go to any other token. And you could even move the market and devalue your own like investment. So I guess my question now is, I guess, Fede, back to you, is like, can you show us what happened next? Like, where did the money go when they stole it?
Yeah, sure. And, maybe going back to what you were saying, because that's, of course, the question for why they're not using Mixer, because as we would see so far, they're not using like Tornado Cash like they did before. But why we saw for much minor hacks, like the FuzzyRex case where there were $230 million dollars that went, or part of it at least, went through Tornado Cash, and even that amount saturated completely Tornado Cash and their pools. In fact, you could easily trace every transaction out for the pattern, but also because 99% of transactions on certain days were from that particular hack. So can you imagine now with 1.4 billion? Of course, you can maybe go slower and go with tiny amounts. So probably, what we are testifying right now is a preparation of other stages that will come later. So in fact, we are seeing that most of the addresses have not moved yet, apart from the initial transactions. And some of them now we are seeing that they are dispersed into hundreds or thousands of different addresses and not moving right now. But let's have a look at some of the things we have found.
I think genuinely the size of the chart is quite staggering. And I think just seeing some of the comments that are coming in place every now and again is like, oh, well, this is like moving to Bitcoin. We have spent hours and end like tracking this money, and it's still going now. And this is just
yeah. So maybe you might remember that one of the first actions taken by the hackers here was to divide the amounts into several different streams and letting them there. Now, this graph that I'm showing right now, this is following just one of the streams, right? And this is already like crazy, but remember, it's one single stream, and we are not seeing all the activity here, just part of it. Now, Nick, you made me lose the point where I was, but okay, let's go around and see again. Oh, I mean, some of the things that was a lot of, probably this is a very good point that we can start from. Look at these transactions. So, and again, I'm adding here just a few. They're not, of course, all the transactions. It's a lot of transactions going to this entity, which I never pronounce well. So I'll let you say how it's called.
Exchange.
Okay. I said EXCH, but okay, this one. And there are a lot of transactions going in and out. So in this very part of the graph, we see a few, but there are literally so many others. Now, how is this possible? So how this exchange is allowing all these funds to go through. Now, I was reading, like probably many of you, different conversations on bitcointalk.org, one of the most famous forums, where they have an account there. And what they are saying just a few hours ago was like, again, say, hey, we are not allowing any money to go through our exchange. They admitted there was one transaction going through them. They said it was a mistake. We are also donating now the fees to charities. But, the blockchain says something completely different. And this is an example. Now, what's your take on that?
I think we could talk about X Exchange like a lot, and I know Andrii, Nick, you guys have come across X before. I know that when ByBit, and we talk about incident response a bit later, but when this attack happened, one of the first things that ByBit did was they sent out an email to everybody they possibly could and said, "You receive money from these addresses that are involved in the hack. Block the funds. We want you to support us," which is like really, really, a proactive way to behave. And genuinely, when you look at like the playbook for incident response, like this is where you want to be. What did X Exchange say to that email exactly? Andrii, do you remember? I can't remember what the exact conversation was.
Between us and X Exchange?
Between ByBit and X Exchange. They published the conversation.
Because actually we also had a quite non-productive conversation with them. Apparently ByBit tried to contact them and notify them about the potential, not even potential, about the leak, about the breach in their system, and provided the list of the wallets. And X Exchange, their member just made the whole case public. They provided their response in the forum Bitcoin Talk. And they just mentioned like, provide us the reason why should we block these funds. The fact that the funds were stolen, the biggest hack in the history of crypto at least, and they still need some kind of a reason from ByBit. I don't know like how to respond to that. And from my own perspective, I've been in touch with X Exchange a lot, not with them directly, but I've seen their exchange in a lot of the cases. In my humble opinion, anything illegal you can remember related to crypto, I truly believe that all of these cases sooner or later hit the X Exchange right now. Because even though they possess themselves as an instant swap exchange, it's not just an instant swap exchange, it's totally anonymous, non-cooperative instant swap exchange. So in my humble opinion, it's a better version of Mixer. Just because if you have a deal with a Mixer, your funds are still on the same blockchain. You cannot move them as a through the bridge to another blockchain. Meanwhile, X Exchange do that, and besides, they do not cooperate and they do it anonymously, and they have a huge pool of Monero. So yeah, lots of cases they made lots of cases as a dead end for us.
Yeah, so if you think about
Like,
every exchange is in fact, a mixer. The only safeguard is that they should, and they usually do KYC and cooperate, which is not the case of this exchange.
yeah.
No.
What do you think, Nick?
Marketing themselves as an instant exchange is dubious at best, right? It's I think as Andrii put it, it is just a mixer. Right? Instant exchanges, especially decentralized exchanges, there is almost always some kind of trail for us to follow on chain as far as where money comes from and where money goes. We see that with almost every properly decentralized bridge, either directly on chain or through like an explorer that they publish and maintain. There's literally zero evidence that X Exchange is anything but centralized. And so for a centralized exchange to run transactions without collecting KYC, without maintaining logs, without maintaining logs for, I think last I heard was like 2 weeks is their limit. And I'm like 15 days or something like that. Like by all accounts, that's just, that used to be called a mixer, and I think it still is. So it's, yeah.
And apparently they're also upset with Etherscan asking to reconsider the community note they put on their address. They say, as a result of misleading statements of some amateur researchers. I think it refers to
That's
and which of course also what we have done, right? So we have a very specific label for this exchange on our tool.
Yeah, we're not super forgiving either. And I think like this is the reality, right? And I think when we were talking about this story, like there are villains, obviously we have the thieves themselves, but then we also have like the community side of this. And like it's no good taking all this money if you've got nowhere to take it to, right? And I think, there's a question in the comments right now about, well, could this cause issues for them to off-ramp the funds? And absolutely it can do, because you haven't got options so ready. And I'd say too about this case is like for us, it was a real test of us as investigators, because we dealt with almost every single blockchain going and all at the same time. And I think as Fedi's chart showed you, we didn't just have like 1, 2, 3, 4 different outputs. Like there were hundreds of them all in parallel, all at the same time, and really, really complicated sort of things. We had token swaps, we had cross-chain bridges, we had the use of instant swap services, we had swapping from Bitcoin and back to Ethereum and then back to Bitcoin again. We had them moving across all sorts of different blockchains. In terms of an exercise, like it's always nice to sort of test your skills, but maybe in a more friendly environment. This was definitely a challenge for us. And, I just talk about Crystal's response to this. So like when this happened on Friday, we initially sort of like knew that this is going to be pretty big. We started monitoring addresses, we started looking for things, and then we stood up a crisis response team. And then we've sort of like taken it on from there. The reality of this case is it's not going to stop for years. Like there's so much money. This is going to go on for a long time. I did see a tweet earlier that said that, a quarter, as a third of all the money has already been laundered. I think that's fair to say that it's been swapped, but I don't think it's been laundered successfully. I don't think they've off-ramped 300 million so quickly.
Yeah,
so I think we've
really
got plenty of time left. Yeah.
It's really misleading the way they put it, like laundered, like, okay, it's gone, which is really not the case. We are still following. We know exactly where it is, but for now, we're just following online. And maybe coming to what you were referring to here, on the graph itself. So let's analyze some of the most common things they're doing. You refer to swapping and bridging, which is exactly what they're doing. We see a massive use of Torchain. I mean, Torchain really, it's used heavily, and we follow through. So it's going through from Ethereum to Bitcoin. Maybe we can also discuss this because that's a really interesting question, why they're switching from ETH to Bitcoin. A question also is about this transaction that I found right after going through Torchain, which was a payment to Kraken, Darknet market. So not Kraken the exchange, but the dark market. What do you think of this? So could have been a payment or something?
If I kind of want to add something right before we jump into this. So with all of the questions of how are they laundering this much money, I think in any instance, if this hadn't been a state-backed actor, we may very well see them turn around and give the money back, right? We saw that with Polymarket a couple of years ago. An individual hacker, right? I think the number there was 60 million. And they very quickly realized that taking it was a lot easier than laundering it. And so they turned right around and gave it right back, and decided that, maybe a bounty was an easier thing to collect than trying to launder it. We're not going to see that, right? Because this is obviously state backed, but it proves like there is stuff like this happens, and the thoughts of laundering it are generally secondary to stealing it. As far as like coming back to what Fede had just pointed out, there's a number of transactions that we see that are super small amounts relative to the total sum. A couple $100 here and there. They peel off to, in this case, I think Fede, you had Kraken Dark Market pulled up. That's not super uncommon for, especially for large hacks, right? That could be things, that could be them buying services. We see this in much smaller cases as well. If you're opening accounts at exchanges, or if you're opening accounts for sets of money mules, oftentimes those are bought under fake IDs. Where do they buy those fake IDs? They buy them on the dark web. So seeing small chunks of funds peel off to certain payment providers such as Block, seeing funds peel off to darknet market exchanges, like for us, I think that's a good indication of, that's them effectively buying more infrastructure or more resources for them to like continue processing these funds.
Yeah, in fact, it was $1,600 transaction, so it's maybe compatible with the kind of fake IDs or something like that.
I mean, I have a slightly different view as well. I do agree that there's that, but I also think that you can take your stolen crypto and sell it at a premium on a darknet marketplace. And, maybe your counterparty is less squeamish about receiving money from a drug marketplace than it is from a DPRK hacker. Again, I don't have anything to back that up, but I do wonder sometimes if they're not so bothered about their ultimate destinations. I think another thing that...
The math in my mind, if you try to use this strategy, 1,600,000 at a time, and you have to launder 1.2 million, how much is going to take?
How much was Hydra Market worth? Like when it was shut down, like 400 million? I can't remember. So even then, you're still a bit short, aren't you?
Yeah, but that is a very real like question to bring up is, and again, we've seen folks in the chat here bring it up on their own. Are they maybe selling to third parties at pennies on the dollar, which is a very viable option, especially considering where their market would probably be. It would probably be either in Russia or in China. We'll use Russia for the sake of our example here, right? If you're a crypto user in Russia and you need to buy your Bitcoin, you're probably buying it at Garantex or some other Russian exchange. You have to launder that money anyway to get it into most services, because they're not going to let you just withdraw out of Garantex and start using it. And so if someone shows up and says, hey, I'm willing to sell you X, hundred thousands of Bitcoin at 70 cents on the dollar, all you have to do is launder it. That's not an inherently terrible proposition, especially for someone that's already in a situation where they're like, I already have to launder my money. It's already going to have to go through either a mixer. I'm going to have to go send it through Tornado Cash. I'm going to have to send it through Monero, whatnot. Right.
Yeah, I think there's so many things to talk about this. And I think another thing to do as well is to discuss, you could even use the stolen money laundered sufficiently to start your own exchange. Like that's the easiest way to do this, right? It's like just become your own bank. And as you said, pennies on the dollar, I'm going to sell, Bitcoin at a premium. Like I'm going to sell it for 20% cheaper than market rate. I'm still going to make my money out of this. I'm going to lose 20%, but I'm still going to be able to make money out of it. And I think this is where, the difficulty of this becomes, because although we have great optics and be able to track things around, there are points where we are blind. Like we don't know every single service along this route. We really try hard. But again, if it's some, dark room chat OTC desk, like, we're puzzled on that. So I do think it's an interesting one to think of the problem. There was another question in the chat, and I think it's probably a good point to bring this up, which is, well, first of all, can we share our question, please? Our second question, please, Valeria, with the thing. So we're just doing a quick poll now. We'll do it before the end of the thing. We'll just leave it open for 10 minutes or so. But one of the things we also noticed about this attack was like it had connections to others. And there's always the question about, well, who did it? Now, the FBI have issued a wanted poster for one of the potential attackers behind this thing. And in that poster, they've actually listed this individual as being responsible for the ByBit Hack, Femex, and a few others. Are there any other indications, like on chain, that we can say that these attacks are linked together? And have we seen anything that sort of like unites them to help us understand who is behind this?
From the blockchain analysis, it was visible that this particular case is connected to some others notoriously known cases. The already mentioned Wazirex case, there are connections already on BTC chain and Ethereum chain, Femex case, and even BTC Turk case. It's from what we have labeled in our system. Besides that, there are a lot of cases that are not publicly available, and there are also connected to this particular case as well. But again, can we say with 100% sure that this particular case is on Lazarus or not?
Well, that's the question. I think on chain, I don't think we can. I think it's again, I don't know your guys' perception of this, but for my money, like the type of attack, everything around it, like all of the circumstantial evidence points to it being Lazarus. Like we know that they're the most proficient group in this. It's their tactic, it's their target, it's everything fits right. But just based on chain data alone, I think it's not possible to draw that inference. Again, I don't know if you guys have disagreements with that, but certainly for my money, like it's too difficult to make that. You need other sources to confirm.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's different if you say, if I would bet that they were the one behind it. Yes, absolutely. Now, can you prove it? As we said.
Yeah.
I mean, we see, maybe there's a question for Andrii. So when you say on chain, we can see it. Basically, probably you're referring to the fact that there are transactions linking the two. So there are completely two different schemes, let's say, of groups of transaction addresses, but then you can find a link between the two, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we can see like common laundering infrastructure. I think that's what else we can do. I want to turn a bit now to like now and like the contemporary aspect of this. So we've kind of discussed the attack itself and the technical things and like the attacker's side. And I want to talk a bit about the response that ByBit have had in this case, and like even across the industry. And like I'll be honest, like all of the blockchain intelligence analytics companies have got a dog in this fight. Like we're all protecting our clients, like trying to keep them from receiving money from these particular thieves. Like we want to make sure we're on top of our game. And there's been lots and lots of cross-industry cooperation. Like even with companies we would consider competitors, like we're working together now to try and close this down. And like, we will fight each other commercially, but when it comes to like, working together for the greater good, everyone's kind of got behind this case. One of the things that's been proposed is like a bounty hunting kind of system. And I think like for example, ByBit now have like a public API where they're sharing addresses that have been reported to them as involved in the attack, or receive stolen funds, like drawing on the crowd of people, such as your internet sleuths and other things to try and drag data out of there. At Crystal, we work really hard for data quality, which isn't so straightforward. But Nick, I want to ask you this question: like, what are the risks you see with like a bounty hunting program? Like, obviously, it drags in more data for you, but like, what are the risks that it poses to attribution?
Yeah, I mean, the risks in this case are that start checking, right? Like, Fede showed the graph, and that was what are we confident saying that's like a third of it? It's probably less than that. So if that's what a third of it looks like, and it's not even done laundering, start tracking and start validating bounty claims on transactions, $10,000 here, $100,000 there. Like a system like that it's hard to administrate. If there was an easier way to administrate it and to automatically validate requests for bug bounties or for places where, hey, we've stopped some funds or whatnot, sure. But again, having, I'm sure ByBit has better things to do with their time at the moment than sit there and try to validate a bunch of bug bounty claims. It also tends to muck up what proper investigators. I don't want to use that term because I feel like anybody nowadays can be a crypto investigator. Like it's all there. It's like Etherscan, blockchain.com. Like there's all these great explorers that are free and open source. But it messes up, like a few bad eggs kind of mess it up for the bunch. We've seen so many Twitter posts now of like, oh, it's the money has already gone. It's already been laundered. It's already, God, I don't know what the last thing we saw. Oh, it's gone. It's already all gone through Tornado Cash. And it's like, we know that's not true. We know that's not true. And so if you start adding, these might be trolls at this point, but if you start adding a bounty to that and then no way to really validate or enforce that bounty or check that bounty, it makes the problem 100, 1,000, a million times worse than what it is now. And now we're not, at this point, we don't even consider most of that data that comes in off of places like Twitter. A lot of it is stuff that our analysts are collecting, that our scripts are tracking and monitoring. Like for us, everything that's gone into the tool now is either something that's been validated by ByBit or that we've tied through algorithms to the hack. And so it is, at this point in time, auditable for us to look back and say, okay, this is our attribution track. But yeah, again, bringing in stuff like outside data like that makes it 10 times more difficult. And with public bug bounty program, it would make that problem exponentially worse. That being said, I think this has been a great test of the sort of crypto ecosystem. Like in the past, it's sort of been the policy for crypto exchanges to keep stuff hidden. If you lose money, keep it hidden, try to figure it out behind the scenes. God knows how many cases we've been involved in situations like that. I think ByBit here was sort of in a unique position where they could admit that the hack had happened and still, instill confidence in their customers that they could fulfill deposits. And so that's a huge leg up that ByBit had. And so by being able to be in that position to say, hey, we've lost this money, but we can still cover you, what they've done is they've effectively turned all eyes to them. And we've seen how well that works, right? Like, I don't think there's really anybody that people would consider, illegitimate in the space who isn't cooperating with them, right? Or outside the folks that we would consider illegitimate or illegal or bad actors in the space, everybody cooperates. All the analytics companies are either working together or working in tandem to track this. Tether, Circle, everybody's looking at this, all the bridges, all the, decentralized exchanges, everybody's sort of looking at this case and trying to get their cut. A, it's good publicity for them. B, it helps ByBit. And C, it kind of shows that with a system like crypto where there is more decentralization and more kind of transparency, stopping stuff like this is possible, right? It's not impossible. So,
but that was still, something that I read online, which was referring to this case by what ByBit did, that it was a masterclass in crisis management. I really appreciated the way they handled it, also because they avoided panic, and although Bitcoin and the other crypto lost a bit, but not as much as it happened in the past. They've been open. They've been quite transparent. Of course, I mean there are things that cannot be displayed or said, but they were quite open. They made live call quite almost immediately, and especially they didn't pose withdrawals. I mean, despite, I don't know if you read when also from Binance ZC, he said, he write a message like, I would pose the withdrawals, and which was not done, and effectively nothing worse happened, and that kept avoided having panic among all the users and all the ecosystem. So I would say, well,
and I think what I'd really love to do here now is just something we said, because the last time we did one of these was with Xerox, and I think Andrii, you said it earlier, like in fact you might have said it, it's like, oh, a little amount like with Xerox, and it was $250 million. I mean, compared to this, everything pales into insignificance, really. But what I find particularly interesting about this is like looking at the response is like, as you said, it's a masterclass. They knew what to do. And I think that makes such a big difference in, what happens next. You don't have much time to react. We know that the chains can be incredibly fast. I mean, I'm looking now at the chart that between the initial test transaction at 14.15 UTC, followed by the withdrawal at 14.30, like, 400,000 Ethereum was stolen, $1.3 billion was moved. Like, that's phenomenal. And, the speed at which you can move the money around, like, it's always what we talk about when we're talking about like blockchains generally, is like you can really move lots of money very, very, very fast without needing a central authority. There's lots of positive things around that. But in this case, it's, how do you react as a company? So I guess I'd like to sort of like take some of the questions here as well. We've been asked is like, most attacks happen at like quiet hours, end of the week, everything else is going on. Like, what can we do to protect ourselves against this? For my money, is security is a 10-foot fence, and criminals will just build an 11-foot ladder, right? Everyone knows that's what happens. And I think what I always look for is security. Even my own approach is, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and it's how you react to it is what's important. So we have like, the all-star cast of investigators here, and you guys have spoken to many individual clients who've been victims of attacks and everything else. Like, what would your recommendations be for them when someone's thinking about a response plan? Like, what should they put in place? I don't know, Nick, if you want to lead us off.
Yeah, I honestly, again, Fede said it, I said it. I mean, like, I think this will become sort of the default blueprint for how to handle cases like this. It obviously, those plans will improve from here. But I think this will be sort of the starting point that everybody now looks at and goes, okay, this is sort of how we need to be handling it. Again, like, I'd like to emphasize the fact that ByBit had either enough confidence or enough in reserves to be able to admit that they lost $1.5 billion and still be able to field all withdrawal requests from customers. I feel like, we've seen with FTX, we saw the whole like liquidity debacle around exchanges. How much do you have in reserves? Do you actually have as much as you claim that you have? All that stuff. I think what this case sort of proves is it proves that having enough liquidity to cover all your customers is a strong suit and sort of a good defense against hacks and breaches and stuff like that. Because if you have enough to cover your customers to the point where you can lose $1 billion and still come out and say to your customers, that's fine, like, trust me, we have all your funds covered. What that does, it means you can put that out publicly, which clearly shows that, like, the industry, even parties that have little to no affiliation to ByBit, either as customers or whatnot, like, they're happy to help. The industry is will help lend a helping hand if needed. You just have to be able to make it public. And a lot of exchanges that don't have those reserves are now going to look at this and go, if we get hacked, can we really publicly say that we get hacked without worrying about a bank run? And the exchanges that are in the position where they can cover a bank run like that and still afford the hack, they're going to be in a much stronger position because they can now rely on the full weight of the industry to help them, in the event that they were to be in, ByBit's shoes in this case.
So I think, like Nick, your point is you need to ensure that you have adequate reserves in case of something going wrong. And that's a really important detail. Yeah.
Yeah. And this case proves that has been a huge advantage for ByBit.
Fede, what would your advice be? What would you put in your...
Probably also, a segregation of the funds because, it really connects to this one. If you minimize, which is the amount that could be stolen from a single cold wallet. So I'm really surprised now. I'm not an expert on how you run an exchange, of course, but I don't know. From my perspective, it felt really strange to see that amount in a single wallet. So I don't know. I cannot make any suggestions, of course, on how to manage it, but I would say that really makes sense to have to have your eggs in more baskets so that if something happens, at least you know that you can cover. So coming to what Nick was saying, if you know what your liquidity is, try to not exceed that in any single point of failure so that even if something happens, because, we know that things happen, but you can cover it.
Yeah, that's fair. Andrii, what would your advice be?
It's a tough one. I just mean all the reaction of Ben, how he reacted and responded to the audience on that case, it was something really huge and powerful for me. Because previously I noticed that even though the cases were public, the owners of their businesses, they tried to hide the information until they fully investigate this case. In this particular case, even though the number was enormous and it absolutely broke the record, Ben responded to the customers almost immediately. The reaction was great. And about the reserves, it's absolutely good point. I totally agree with that. From the stream with Ben, he mentioned that ByBit could take a hit of up to $10 billion equivalent. So it basically means that the reserves of ByBit are really huge and they could take this hit. And yeah, it's a good sign for all their customers that if you can see such a reaction from their exchange, if you see how open they are, it's totally a good sign. Thank you.
I think then, so we're in the last 3 minutes of the presentation here. So I just want to draw a line under everything, which is, sorry, Fred, you want to say something before I roll up?
Well, I wanted to maybe, very quickly address, because we launched it in the poll, and also I see a lot of comments in the chat, which is about, the rumors that there were about, discussions about rollbacks. And if it's an option or not, I don't know. I have my opinion, which is totally against it.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
think,
think?
again, the rolling back at this point is counterproductive, right?
It's already too late
In the
anyway.
direction that everybody pushes crypto, like this has been the test. Crypto is open, it's decentralized, it is visible and accessible to everybody. And what that has done is it has allowed everybody from companies like ours to other exchanges to, people that are bored on a Sunday on Twitter to track and assist in this case. Like that is the beauty of crypto. And one of the risks there is that everything, it's immutable, right? That's one of the trusts that we have to lay down in the system. And so to roll back for this kind of case is, it sort of breaks that, right? That's sort of what we've been building towards. And yeah, that's my opinion.
And also it would lead to a lot of questions from other victims. Why ByBit? Why not us?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, it would be a
What about
precedent.
it or other?
There is some sort of like discussions in the UK about some other cases, like, about rolling back and, thing. There was like a famous case in the UK that is ongoing about that now. I think just to sort of draw a line under it then, and I think like, my top takeaways from this is this is an unprecedented event. Like genuinely, I feel like proud to work with you guys and proud of my team and everyone else who's in the same position. And I think there's something to be said as well about, the guy at home who's doing this, like where, it's not just the law enforcement professionals who can handle this. Like everybody can get in there and get stuck in, and I don't necessarily have a major issue with that. Obviously, the legal side of it has to be handled by someone who's qualified, but we can all sit there and we can all track funds and we can all be part of the solution here, which is, you know, a wonderful community thing that we can do, right? We can all work together. The second part of this is, you know, the complexity of this attack is unprecedented, and it's not without its challenges for the attackers as well as the people who've been victims. And I think the complexity that the attackers have you know, performed, they've now got a big problem in trying to launder the money. And to go back to our at-home guys, everyone can play a part in this. Everyone can get looking for addresses that are involved in this hack. You know, you can educate yourself, you can do something, and you can make this more complicated for them. Our goal is to make the bar of entry much higher for the criminals, and we are going to continue to do that. The final thing then to talk about is like how we respond to this incident, and not just as, you know, well, we can make better security, but it's about ensuring we have adequate liquidity to cover our deposits, to make sure that if it goes wrong, we can take the hit and we can stand up again. And the second part is, you know, the communication aspect. We've all said that you know, the response of the CEO of ByBit was absolutely impeccable. Like he got in there early, he acknowledged it quickly. The same day they acknowledged the attack, they called for help, they notified everyone, they've sent out emails to every single company in blockchain analytics, investigations, every man and his dog's involved in this right now. And that's really what you need to be prepared to do. And if there's, as you said, Federico, there's no better way to describe it, as a masterclass in how to handle a crisis, this has certainly been a very good demonstration of what you can do and how you can make it work. And I think, you know, coming out the back of this, like it's a dreadful day to have happened to the industry, to have so much money stolen. But what we can take away from this is like the positive that, you know, we now understand better on how to react to these things. There have been many other attacks and many other thefts over the past 12 months, which didn't get reported, have been brushed under the carpet, have been kept quite quiet. I don't necessarily have a problem with businesses wanting to do that, but if you want help, if you want to have the kind of response that ByBit do, you really need to try and you know, coordinate as much as you can with everyone else. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. We've gone 2 minutes over time, and I'm pretty sure we could dive into about a million other things, you know, talking about this case, because there is so much more to discuss. We could talk more about different currencies and laundering methods, and I think there's about 15 other things that, you know, we've discussed, like as a team, we wanted to discuss as well. But it's just so much to encompass in this huge event. That's all from me. Thanks very much. I'll say goodbye for now. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.